Before we get started, I want to let you know that there will be a change happening with these videos. I will be posting what I edit to a separate YouTube channel that goes by Lobbert, link in the description. Don't worry though, I plan to continue partnering with the PDH Pod podcast. They also plan to post other PDH videos here, so if you have not subscribed here already, please consider it now, and don't forget to check out the podcast. I also want to let you know that this episode was done as a collaboration with Papa Popper from the Common Connoisseurs, featuring the Tryhards, a primarily CPDH YouTube channel. You can find a link to their channel and social media in the description. Additionally, Brad was supposed to host, but was unable to make it, so Papa Popper stepped up and hosted the livestream for us. You can find the replay of this game, and a game too that you can't find here, on their channel. Now let's get to the game. If you'd like to skip the deck introductions, skip to around 2 minutes 20 seconds. Lobbert is going first with Alert Heedbonder, a 2/4 human scout for 1 and 2 hybrid green-white, with vigilance, and at the beginning of your end step, you gain 1 life for each creature you control with vigilance. Going second is Derek with Terravore, a star Lurgoyf for 1 green-green, with trample, and Terravore's power and toughness are equal to the number of land cards in all graveyards. Third is Papa Popper with Rilsa Rael, Kingpin, a legendary 2/5 human rogue for 3 blue-black, with Death Touch, and when Rilsa Rael, Kingpin, enters the battlefield, you take the initiative, and whenever you attack, target attacking creature gains Death Touch until end of turn. If you've completed a dungeon, that creature also gets +5/+0 and gains First Strike and Menace until end of turn. And going last is Magus of the Jank with Halsin, Emerald Archdruid, a legendary 2/4 elf druid for 3 and a green with an activated ability that costs 1. It says, until end of turn, target token you control becomes a green bear creature with base power and toughness 4/4 in addition to its other colors and types, and choose a background, with the chosen background of Veteran Soldier, a legendary enchantment background that says, commander creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, for each opponent, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token that's tapped and attacking that opponent. Lobbert starts the game with an Arctic tree line and passes. Derek plays a forest and a Vessel of Nascency and ends his turn. Papa plays Maestro's Theater, which sacrifices itself, gains him a life, and puts an island into play tapped. Magus plays Colony Garden, which puts a 0/1 plant token into play. He then passes. Lobbert plays Snow-Covered Plains and casts Hovermere. Derek starts his turn, plays Terramorphic Expanse, and passes. Papa plays a Swamp, Belwar Stone, and passes. Magus plays Selesnya Sanctuary as his land for turn, which returns Colony Garden to his hand. He passes. In Lobbert's upkeep, Derek sacrifices Terramorphic Expanse to put a forest into play tapped. Lobbert draws for turn, plays a Plains, and casts his commander, Alert Heedbonder, passes, and gains 2 life from his commander. Derek plays a forest and passes. Papa untaps and plays Phyrexian Rager, which makes him lose a life and draw a card. He plays Bojuka Bog as his land, which exiles Derek's graveyard, and then he passes. Magus plays Colony Garden again, which gives him another plant token, and he uses Selesnya Sanctuary to play Arcane Signet. Lobbert starts his turn and goes straight to combat. He attacks Papa for 2 with his commander, and Magus for 1 with his Flying Mirror. After combat, he taps out for Skyhunter Prowler, and then passes. In his end step, Derek sacrifices Vessel of Nascency to reveal a Slippery Karst, Forest, Mold Shambler, and Explore. He puts Mold Shambler into his hand and the rest into his graveyard. He then starts his turn, plays a forest, and casts his commander, Terravore, which is currently a 3/3. He ends his turn. Papa plays a Study Hall as his land for turn, and casts his commander, Rilsa Rael, Kingpin, which gains him the initiative. He puts a swamp into his hand off of the initiative, and then attacks Lobbert with Phyrexian Rager. Rilsa triggers, and gives Phyrexian Rager Death Touch until end of turn. Lobbert takes 2, and Papa passes. Magus plays a Plains, and pays 4 for his commander, Halsin, Emerald Archdruid. He activates Halsin to make one of his plant tokens a 4/4, and attacks Derek with it. Derek takes 4, which concludes Magus's turn. Lobbert starts his turn, and goes straight to combat again. He attacks Papa with a 1/3 with flying, and Magus with a 1/2 with flying. Papa and Magus take 1. Lobbert takes the initiative, which puts a snow-covered forest into his hand. He plays it as his land for turn, and plays Palace Sentinels, which make him the Monarch. He passes, draws off of the Monarch, gains 3 off of his commander, and discards Courier Hawk to hand size. Derek plays his 5th forest, casts Owlbear, which draws him a card, and he ends his turn. Papa goes straight to combat and attacks Lobbert with both of his creatures. His commander triggers, and he gives his Phyrexian Rager Death Touch. Lobbert does not block, and takes 4 damage. Papa takes the Monarch and Initiative. He chooses to scry 2 off of the Initiative, and keeps both cards on top. After combat, he casts Zombie Ogre, passes, and draws off of the Monarch. Magus plays a Forest, and plays his background, Veteran Soldier. He goes to combat, swings at Lobbert with Halsin and a plant token, and Papa with the other plant token. Because he attacked a player with the highest life total, Veteran Soldier triggers and creates a 1/1 attacking each of his opponents. Lobbert stack blocks Halsin with his 2/4 Palasentinels, 2/4 Commander, and 1/3, and blocks the 1/1 Soldier with his 1/2. Derek does not block, and Papa blocks with his 3/5. Magus activates Halsin targeting the 2 tokens attacking Lobbert, the Soldier attacking Derek, and the unblocked plant token attacking Papa. Lobbert, Derek, and Papa each take 4 damage. Magus loses a Soldier and his Commander, and Lobbert's Hovermere dies. Magus gains the Monarch and the Initiative, so he puts a Plains into his hand, passes, draws off of the Monarch, and discards 2 Forests to hand size, so Terravore becomes a 5/5. Lobbert taps a Plains for a white and plays Selesnia's Sanctuary, which returns the Plains to his hand. He pays 1 more for a Volshock Morningstar, and equips it to his Skyhunter Prowler. He goes to combat, and attacks Magus with his Commander and a 3/5. He takes 5, and Lobbert takes the Monarch and Initiative. He puts 2 +1/+1 counters on his Commander to make it a 4/6, passes, draws off of the Monarch, and gains 2 life from his Commander. He discards Ash Barrens to hand size, which makes Terravore a 6/6. Derek plays a Forest, casts Spider Umbra on his Owlbear to make it a 5/5 with reach, and plays Mold Shambler without kicker. He attacks Magus with Terravore. Before damage, he sacrifices a land to cycle Edge of Autumn, making Terravore a 7/7, so Magus goes to 16. Derek passes. Papa plays an island and casts Fleshbag Marauder, so Papa sacrifices Fleshbag Marauder, Magus sacrifices a plant, Lobbert sacrifices Palasentinels, and Derek sacrifices Mold Shambler. He swings at Lobbert with his 2/2 and gives it Death Touch with Rilsa. Lobbert takes 2, and Papa takes the Monarch and Initiative. He uses the Initiative to goad Derek's Terravore and passes. Zombie Ogre progresses him through the Undercity, so he gets a 4/1 skeleton with Menace and draws off of the Monarch. Magus plays a Plains and targets Terravore with Cage of Hands to make it so it can't attack or block. Derek responds by targeting it with Snakeskin Veil to give it hexproof until end of turn and a +1/+1 counter. Magus responds to that by flashing in a Benevolent Blessing on Terravore to give it protection from green so that the Snakeskin Veil fizzles, and Cage of Hands resolves. Magus then targets Lobbert's Sky Shroud Prowler with Fell the Pheasant to deal 5 damage to it and make a food. Lobbert responds by tapping Alert Heedbonder to convoke Gather Courage to give it +2/+2 until end of turn. The creature survives, Magus gets a food, and then passes. Lobbert plays a Snow-Covered Plains and goes to combat. He attacks Magus with Alert Heedbonder, and Papa with a 3/5 with Flying. Papa plays Capsizing Wave, the adventure half of Sword Coast Serpent, on Lobbert's 3/5 to return it to his hand. After combat, Lobbert plays Armored Griffin, and equips it with Volshock Morningstar to make it a 4/5. He passes, and gains 2 life. Derek plays a Jalum Tome, and passes. Papa progresses through the dungeon due to the initiative, and reveals the top 10 cards of his library. Among them are Crypt Rats, Vicious Battle Rager, and Bone Picker. Papa chooses the Bone Picker, so it enters with 3 +1/+1 counters and gets hexproof until his next turn. He shuffles, plays a Swamp, and attacks Lobbert with his Skeleton. Rilsa triggers, and he targets his Skeleton, so it gets Death Touch, and also gets +5/+0, First Strike, and Menace until end of turn because he's completed a dungeon, making it a 7/1. Lobbert goes to 21, and after combat, Papa plays a Slum Reaper. He sacrifices the Phyrexian Rager, Magus sacrifices a plant token, Lobbert sacrifices his Alert Heedbonder, and Derek sacrifices Terravore. Papa passes, Zombie Ogre triggers, he restarts the dungeon and puts a Swamp into his hand, and then draws off of the Monarch. Magus plays a Forest, and pays 6 to cast Halsin again. Pays 2 to sacrifice his food token, to gain 3 life and pass. Lobbert pays 5 for his Commander, and attacks Derek with his 4/5 with Flying. Derek blocks with his 5/5 with Reach. Lobbert casts You Hear Something on Watch, choosing to give his creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. Derek targets his 5/5, and Lobbert's 4/5 with Unnatural Aggression to make them fight. Lobbert responds by using his creatures to convoke Ephemeral Shields to give his creature indestructible. Combat damage goes through, and Spider Umbra is destroyed instead of Owlbear. Lobbert passes, and gains 2 life off of his Commander. Derek plays a Forest, pays 5 for a 7/7 Terravore, and passes. On his end step, Papa plays Curfew, holds priority, and plays Displace, targeting Slum Reaper and Rilsa. Derek responds by using Ram Through to deal 7 damage to Slum Reaper, using his Terravore. The excess damage rolls over to deal 5 damage to Papa. Rilsa is flickered, so Papa progresses through the dungeon and puts 2 +1/+1 counters on his skeleton. Curfew resolves, so Papa returns Rilsa, Magus returns a soldier token, Lobbert returns Alert Heedbonder, and Derek returns Owlbear to his hand. Papa starts his turn, progresses through the dungeon, and chooses to goad the Terravore. He then draws, plays a swamp, and plays Rilsa Rael, Kingpin. He filtered mana through Study Hall, so he gets to scry 1. He puts the card on the bottom, progresses through the dungeon again, and chooses to put a 4/1 skeleton with Menace into play. He goes to combat and attacks Derek with his 6/3 skeleton and Lobbert with his 6/5 bone picker. Rilsa triggers, gives the bone picker +5/+0, Death Touch, First Strike, and Menace. Lobbert takes 11, so he goes to 14, and Derek takes 6, so he goes to 16. Papa passes and draws off of the Monarch. Magus plays Arctic Treeline and a kick to Scout the Wilderness, so he puts a forest into play tapped from his deck and gets 2 1/1 soldier tokens. He uses those tokens to convoke a Scatter the Seeds, which gets him 3 1/1 Saproling tokens. He then passes. Lobbert plays the Snow-Covered Plains and attacks Papa with his Armored Griffin, so Papa takes 4. Lobbert gains the Monarch in the initiative, so he chooses to deal 5 damage to Papa. After combat, he plays Alert Heedbonder from his hand, followed by Skyhunter Prowler. He passes, draws off of the Monarch, and gains 3 life off of his commander. Derek plays Owlbear, which draws him a card. Terravore is goaded, so it must attack. He sends it at Magus, who puts 3 Saproling tokens in front of it, and takes 4, so he goes down to 11 life, and up to 11 commander damage. Derek passes. Papa starts his turn, and goes straight to combat. He attacks Lobbert with his 6/3 and 4/1 skeletons with Menace, as well as the 6/5 Bone Picker with Flying. He attacks Derek with Zombie Ogre. Rilsa triggers, and he gives Zombie Ogre +5/+0, Death Touch, First Strike, and Menace until end of turn. Lobbert stack blocks the 6/3 with his 1/3 and 2/4 commander, and blocks the 6/5 flyer with his 4/5. Derek plays Moment's Peace to prevent all combat damage this turn. After combat, Papa plays Crypt Rats and Mistvault Bridge. He pays 3 into Crypt Rats, deal 3 damage to each creature and each player. Papa's Skeletons and Crypt Rats, Magus' tokens, and Lobbert's Skyhunter Prowler die. Papa passes. Zombie Ogre triggers, so he progresses through the dungeon and reveals the top 10 cards of his deck. Among them, he finds Rottide Gargantua and Shortcut Seeker. He chooses to put Rottide Gargantua into play with 3 +1/+1 counters and hexproof until his next turn. As it enters, he sacrifices Bone Picker to make each of his opponents sacrifice a creature. Magus sacrifices Halsin, Lobbert sacrifices Alert Heedbonder, and Derek sacrifices Owlbear. He then targets Lobbert's Armored Griffin with Tragic Slip to give it -13/-13, since a creature died this turn. Lobbert responds by targeting his Griffin with Snakeskin Veil to give it a +1/+1 counter and hexproof until his next turn. Magus begins his turn, plays a forest, and pays 8 for Halsin, Emerald Archdruid, and plays Choking Restraints on Papa's Rilsa so it can't attack or block. Magus passes. Lobbert starts his turn and draws a card off of the initiative. Draws for turn and kicks Vines of Vastwood, targeting Armored Griffin to give it +4/+4 and make it unable to be targeted by spells or abilities his opponents control. He then enchants it with Cartouche of Strength to give it +1/+1, trample, and have it fight Terravore. Lobbert's 10/10 kills Drainer's 7/7 Terravore. Lobbert then attacks Papa to eliminate him before passing. He draws off of the Monarch. Derek casts Fork in the Road, which puts a forest in his hand and another one into his graveyard. He then plays the Forest and Jungle Wayfinder. Each player puts a basic forest into their hand, and Derek passes. Magus plays Origin Spellbomb, taps and sacrifices it to get a 1/1 Mirror token, and plays a forest. He attacks Derek with Halsin, which triggers Veteran Soldier. Lobbert blocks the Soldier token, and Derek blocks the 2/4 Halsin with his 3/3. Magus plays Luminescent Rain and chooses Soldier, so he gains 4 life. Derek takes 1, one of Magus' Soldier dies, and he passes. Lobbert starts his turn and progresses through the dungeon, so he reveals the top 10 cards of his deck. Among them, he finds Combat Professor, Parhelion Patrol, Sunblade Samurai, and Heliod's Pilgrim. He puts Parhelion Patrol into play with 3 +1/+1 counters, and it gets hexproof until his next turn. He draws for turn, plays a Snow-Covered Plains, enchants his Griffin with Rancor to give it +2/+0 and trample, and attacks Magus with his 8/7 with Flying. Magus takes it. After combat, Lobbert pays 7 for Alert Heedbonder and passes. He draws a card off of the Monarch and gains 3 off of his commander. In his end step, Derek plays Wasteful Harvest to mill 5 and put Tocasia's dig site into his hand. Derek starts his turn and plays the Tocasia's dig site as his land for turn, and casts Terravore for 7 as a 9/9 before passing. Magus casts Goldvein Pick and equips it to Halsin to make it a 3/4, and ends his turn. Lobbert begins his turn by restarting the Undercity, which puts a snow-covered plains into his hand. He draws, plays the snow-covered plains, and plays Heliod's Pilgrim, which puts Benevolent Blessing into his hand. He attacks Derek with his 5/6 and 8/7. Both have flying, so Derek is eliminated. After combat, Lobbert plays Winged Shepherd and passes. He draws a card off of the Monarch and gains 4 life off of his commander. Magus starts his turn and concedes, so Lobbert wins. Thank you for watching until the end. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the PDH Pod podcast anywhere podcasts are found.